Good morning and welcome to Jew in the City Speaks with your host, Allison Josephs, also known as Jew in the City. For Mental Health Awareness Month, we've been trying to discuss different issues that come up, not just in the world at large in terms of mental health, but what specifically are issues that we're looking at in the Orthodox Jewish community. Now, the truth is that anything that happens in the world at large also happens in the Jewish community because, surprise, surprise, although Hollywood may not show this, we are humans too. But the thing is that when we talk about mental health issues in the Orthodox community, there are different things we can bring in. We can talk about what culturally makes us different, that makes mental health issues maybe more challenging in certain ways or more hidden in certain ways, or just sort of unique to our community. What Torah wisdom can we look to get healthy? And really, at the end of the day, to be a healthy person, both physically and mentally, is a Jewish idea. We have to get the best information out there. We have to work on healing and prevention. And that's why this type of information is so important. So I'm bring to you today two incredible leaders in the field. We have with us Dr. Michael Salamon, who is a psychologist, wrote a book on abuse in the Orthodox Jewish community. And we have with us also Rabbi Yanky Horowitz, who has been an advocate for years. I mean, really, both of them have, but sort of from different perspectives. One's from the mental health side and one from the rabbinic side. So Dr. Salamon and Rabbi Horowitz, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here.
So the topic that I asked both of you to talk to us today about is something that I've been thinking a lot about recently. I think it started first because one of our Makom members a couple of years ago brought me into her own personal story of an emotional and a manipulator and abusive sort of educational figure in her life who this person never laid a finger on her. And yet, literally decades later, the abuse that she experienced through this educator was so traumatic that as she described the incidents of humiliation and control, her body was literally shaking. And so this kind of like flagged for me, like, what is this emotional abuse manipulation in terms of what are the red flags for this? I started noticing, similar things in other leaders that exist. Thank God. I think most of the leadership that we have in our community are good people, hardworking, coming from a good place. But the thing about emotional abusers, manipulators, kind of cultish type of leaders is that they exist everywhere. And I think they can maybe have a special way of finding a foothold, finding cover within our community because of our reverence towards leaders. And so that's what I want to unpack today, both what the red flags are, what the dangers are, and how they may find refuge in, respect for leadership is a beautiful thing for the most part, unless the leader is problematic. So Dr. Salamon, if you could start us off, what are some red flags that we see as a pattern with these types of, cult leaders that have this lavish following that maybe also have this, side gig where they abuse, humiliate, manipulate?
Well, I wouldn't call it a side gig. I think it's part of their approach to dealing with people. Ultimately, abusers are the same, whether or not they're emotional abusers, physical or sexual abusers. Essentially, they want to control other people. They lack empathy. They have their own goals in mind. They target certain individuals and they groom them, but they don't just groom the individual that's targeted. They groom the family of the individual. They groom the community of the individual. They groom the entire organizational structure so that we get something along the lines of what in psychology we call institutional betrayal. The organization becomes their mouthpiece to protect them. So what do we have to watch out for? We have to watch out for the way they shame people, they humiliate individuals, they insult them, they create fear, they gaslight, all with the intent to control individuals for whatever gain that these controlling abusers want from their flock. It could be money. It could be a following that they want for their own egos. It could be any number of reasons that they want this. But they're good at at somehow manipulating. It's interesting. There are so many terms to describe what happens to certain individuals that when they belong to an organization. Psychology has a variety of terms. One of the things that I like the best is when I'm studying these types of individuals is something I call pluralistic ignorance. It's not what I call it, it's what the field calls it. Pluralistic ignorance. What is that? People join organizations, they want to be part of a community. They seem to believe that this works for them, but they see that something's not right. But they actually approach it with the attitude that they know that there's something wrong with what's going on here, but they still want to be part of the organization. So they tell themselves everybody else in this organization is a little bit off and they're kowtowing to this abusive leader, but I know better, so I'm not going to go along with this abusive situation. It doesn't work because once they become part of that community, they become subject to the abuse. They become subject to being controlled. There's a whole pattern that goes on, and individuals don't necessarily see it because the first steps in getting abused is joining something and seeing that something's not right, but making those excuses. Other people get sucked in, but I won't.
Fascinating. You've been a child advocate for years, and you've done so much work for the community in terms of, flagging child sex abuse. And I think so much of what we talk about, maybe because it's easier to pinpoint, there's actually a point of contact between the abuser and the person, and it's illegal. And so there's, the ability, we follow the proper channels and go to the authorities and, do the legal route. There's a way to punish them. Where does this type of abuse fall into Jewish law? What's the Isser? And, what does our community do maybe because of our reverence as leaders? How do we possibly miss people for who they are and what they're worth?
I think thank you, Allison. Dr. Salamon, that was really fascinating. That pluralistic ignorance is just, I gotta study this a little bit. Thank you for the pointer. The way I see it, Allison, any person in any position of leadership has a responsibility to guide the people who turn to him or her for guidance in a way that's best for them and not best for him or her. And to I believe, promote independence and promote growth in the people, not that devotion that really inhibits that. If you ask me to find the verse, the pasuk in the Torah that supports this, our chachamim, our sages, prepared that the Torah says that we shouldn't place a stumbling block. You shouldn't put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. Meaning, if a person can't see and you put something in front of them, they'll trip on it, of course, which is a horribly cruel act. But our sages compare it to giving a person bad business advice because it might be good for you, let's say. And I think that ultimately all of this is so much about control, like you said, manipulation. And I think it's such an affront, it's such a terrible thing to do to people, where you start playing these mind games. And I think it honestly, before people get into a situation, is the easiest time to look at it, which is why I tell people to look for these flags, look for these types of clues. I do workshops I used to do workshops with the parents in my yeshiva, and I did in the general community also on selecting a school, selecting a high school. And one of the things I would say is just, let's say it's a grade school, look at it, the 8th graders, the 7th grade, the middle school kids. You're looking at a high school, look at the 11th and 12th graders, because that's what, quote unquote, the product is. If you see everybody acting the same way and dressing, dressing is universally, some schools have a dress code, formal or informal, but if you see people doing exactly the same thing, they're cutting off the corners of the kids. It's like cookies. Cookies normally come out the way you mold them. If you see square cookies, somebody cut off the edges. So, and even in my own professional life, mentoring, counseling, helping people. Take that, for example, picking a school. In my own yeshiva, my grade school, I wouldn't meet with parents who asked me to select a high school until they went to 2 open houses and personally visited 2 schools and spoke to the leadership of the school and took a look at the playground and the kids. Then they would come back and I would say, because I said, you own this. This is not my decision. I have no business picking a high school for your son. And I always did this with my students in every way. I do child safety classes. I do parent classes. The first thing I say is, I'm going to empower you. I'm going to give you the tools to be able to do this on your own. And one of the things that I often look at and encourage people to look at is what happens if you don't take that person's advice. Someone comes to me and asks me for advice. Someone asks Dr. Salamon for advice. We're emotionally healthy people. Somebody doesn't listen to our advice. It's your life, not mine. I wish you well. If it's a problem, come back. We'll talk about it. But I'm happiest when they're independent, and when you actually see this in communal leaders. Again, I'm mostly familiar with the Orthodox Jewish world. It's all about promoting independence and dissent, creating dissent. Our greatest sages encourage dissent. I mean, you look throughout the Torah, this is what we're supposed to do.
If I can expand on that a little bit, again,
Please.
as a social psychological term to describe some of what you're saying, it's called the authoritarian dynamic. And if I get it correctly, it's more along the lines of people feel some sort of a threat, moral threat, or a lifestyle threat, they're more likely to shut down their independence and ask for leaders to make decisions for them. And that's where we get into trouble.
Right.
That's exactly where people get into trouble, because they make themselves vulnerable to a leadership that may have no morals, but presents themselves as being well-grounded and concerned for others. And that's where, not just in our religion, but I see this in other religions, because I don't just practice within the Frum community, although it's a large part of what I do. The research is also very abundant. It happens in any community. And in fact, if you look at this most recent report about the Southern Baptist Convention research that was released just on Monday this week, you see the same thing there. Individuals were looking for stronger moral leadership. So what they did was they shut down for 20 years any reports of abuse by their leaders.
If I can give you the rabbinic, we're going back and forth because I think it's great that we're together. We work together on so many things. Allison, thank you for bringing us together here again, because the research and the anecdotal and the rabbinic and we should be working together. That's what we're supposed to do. And in fact,
exactly right.
This is another good example. When you see rabbinic people who discount medical advice, so you see medical advisors who tell you not to listen to anyone else. We're supposed to have this healthy relationship, but this idea, I keep seeing this again and again and again. What you're describing, that they want to believe in something and in people, and they turn a blind eye to everything. I'll tell you something else that I notice. Again, this is anecdotal. I'm curious if there's any research on this, doctor. Is I find that when people make a significant lifestyle change, life choices, let's say they make Aliyah, they go to Israel and they join, a beautiful community there, or they become Balei Tshuva, they become religiously observant. I've heard this. Hundreds of parents have told this to me over the years. I asked them, why'd you do this? Well, they told me to do it. What did you think at the time? Well, I thought it was wrong, but they distrust their own radar. They distrust their own systems that they had in place because they made this change, and they respect these new people who know so much more Torah than they do and who know so much more, so they kind of park that the intuitive side of them like away somewhere, tucked away, and don't follow their instincts when they feel something is wrong.
I could throw out, I don't know how many examples, anecdotes that support what you're saying. I mean, just two come to mind. One is we've had many cases over the years in our practice. It's a group practice, not just me, of individuals who, as they say, flipped out. And I don't think I have to explain what that means. And whoever their rabbi was told them to marry a certain person. They marry, they have 3, 4, 5 children, and suddenly they realize this is not who they are. This marriage is not what they want to be in. And there's something wrong with the way they're leading their lives. Not that they want to give up on religion, but this is not what they are. And I say to people when they come to me before marriage, that if you want rabbinic advice about who to marry, then you're not ready to get married. You have to learn what you want, who you are, and who you're ready to marry. And if you need to bounce ideas off of people, then maybe the person to bounce the idea off of is not your Rav from yeshiva, but the Rav of your community, the one who knows your family, who knows where you come from, who has a broader understanding of who you are, and is not trying to get you maybe to join their particular way of life.
And
So I want to actually jump into sort of the need for the leader to have a certain outcome. That's an upcoming topic. I want to just clarify one thing that you sort of alluded to before, Dr. Salamon, but I want to really clarify this so it's crystal clear. What I've seen, what I understand for the sex abusers is that all of the love that they acquire and sort of the big personalities that they often have is really a cover to be able to do the abuse that they do. And I think in a case like Chaim Walder, what came up, there were some questions out there, which was like, was anything sincere? Was any of that Torah, any of those insights sincere? Did that come from any like real or good place? Or was it all just a cover to be able to do the acts of evil? I don't know if there's a definitive answer, but I'm pretty sure I heard people experts talk about that they're really lacking some empathy and some, natural parts of their personalities that healthy people have, and it's all a cover. So can you clarify for this point, for both the sex abusers and then I assume for the emotional manipulators and abusers, if we see these, great amounts of inspiration and great acts of chesed, for me personally, one leader that personally humiliated me, that really kind of took my breath away with the interaction that we had. I thought that he was dangerous, and I wasn't out there to start a war, but I would quietly mention my experience to people over the years. Literal is to say, I think this person may be dangerous, never laid a finger on me, but what would this person do around, more vulnerable people? And the response was always, but the Torah is so great, the inspiration is so tremendous, the acts are so beyond. We even did a poll on Twitter, and I asked our Twitter followers if the leader, spreads great information, does great acts of kindness, and also has an emotionally controlling and manipulative side, does the good outweigh the bad? And 33% said that the good outweighed the bad. So if you could clarify for us, are these acts of inspiration and kindness just a cover? Is there also a sincere side to this for the sex abuser, for the emotional abuser, or is this a way to get leeway to have room to do the quiet acts of evil?
So the answer to that is yes and yes. The research is not totally clear. I just, again, want to clarify the fact, from my perspective, what I've seen clinically, the research I've done, and what's available in the outside research that I've studied, it seems that most abusers, whether or not it's physical, sexual, or emotional, have the same lack of empathy. The question is, to what degree do they lack that empathy, and whether or not they themselves were abused in childhood, and this might be a result of it. Nobody can totally answer that question. And even if they had some abuse in their own childhood, that certainly doesn't justify what they're doing going forward. The other part of this is, and maybe the more critical part of this is, again, we're talking about that authoritarian dynamic. They know that they want to be in control, and they know how to do it. And so they target people that they think that they can control. And they will do whatever they can to get those people sucked into their ego satisfying or physically satisfying or sexually satisfying throws so that they can get what they want from them. Again,
And
it's
I
hard to, yeah, sure, Rabbi.
go
No,
finish.
it's just hard to know exactly what totally motivates them. Look, I don't really work that much with abusers directly. One of my colleagues does that, but what we have found is they are very good at justifying what they do. They always find excuses. In fact, there's an acronym in the literature. It's called DARVO. Um, this acronym basically tells you how these individuals operate. Denial for D, DARVO. Uh, Attack, they attack their victims, and then they reverse the victims and offenders, making their victims seem like they're the ones who started it. They all do that, whether or not it's physical, sexual, or emotional abuse.
And
And by the way,
sorry,
yeah,
sorry.
Rabbi.
Finish,
No,
go.
one more.
I want to listen to you. I like learning. Go ahead, finish, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Just you mentioned the Walder situation. I'm in the process of finishing a documentary about sexual abuse, child sexual abuse in the Jewish world. We're doing it with an Israeli film company. We just signed a distribution agreement. Hopefully it'll be out. I don't know when. I don't know how these things operate, but we interviewed someone. In the end, they may not be in the film for a bunch of reasons, but we interviewed someone who was sucked in by Walder 17 years ago. And when she told her madricha in the seminary what was going on, her madricha said, well, everybody knows you need to stay away from him. Why was nobody talking about it at that point? Because he had this persona. He had manipulated enough people in the community, and he was targeting individuals and got away with it because nobody was willing to recognize his abuse. Rabbi, I'm sorry, I interrupted
please.
you twice.
What I wanted to say about what you said about the humiliation and about people who think differently, I found a correlation. So when one of the follower group speaks up, they pound them into the ground publicly. That the people they humiliate, it's not always random. The people who show some signs of independence, they bop them over the head terribly, and that serves as a message for everybody else to worry about that, that negative interaction. So it's just horrible, and you see. I keep hearing from people, yeah, but they do good things, but they do good things, but they do good things. There's something else I want to point out. I've had the great privilege of having 3 incredible mentors, Rabbeim, in my life. Rabbi Pam. Rabbi Pam was our Rebbe in yeshiva and beyond. Yibadel Chaim Tovim, they should live and be well. Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky, who's been our posek for 23 years in Project Yes and all my work. And lately, over the past 5-7 years, I've had the great privilege of developing a deep relationship with Rav Asher Weiss in Israel. And they're all outstanding Talmidei Chachamim scholars and incredibly refined human beings. I never, ever heard a negative word from them about anybody. And if it was just mild. And I always tell people, just when you watch your leaders, one of the things, judge negative to positive comments. Just check, what Gutman did the research on families. Just listen to negative comments. If you start, and I would tell my students, my 8th graders, I used to do finishing school with them the last year. I would teach them public speaking and creative writing, to give them some skills. And I would tell them, I would sit down with them and I would say, listen, kids, you're going to go off and live life. You're always welcome to come back, but this is the way of the world. You're going to go on. How will you know if someone is a good leader for you? If that person makes you kinder and gentler and more sharing and a more decent person, you're on the right path. If the person makes you angry and speaks in angry tones, just run away. Come back to me if you have a question. So I would follow. My Rebbe Rav Pam told me something, I want to balance this notion of listening to rabbinic advice with being wary. I think before you listen to someone's advice, you really should develop a deep relationship with the person and respect everything else about him or her. And my Rebbe told me something. I was on I did a total 180 after he spoke to me. It took me a couple of days to process, but I respectfully argued with him about it. I said, Rebbe, you can't do this, Rebbe. It's not fair. And we had it. You'd be shocked if you heard the discussion. And he didn't bat an eyelash. And he never like checked up with me. You spoke to him 5 years after, a year later, he would remember exactly what you said and follow up with care. And with Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky is the same. That's what a Rebbe is. People should misunderstand. People look, that doesn't mean there aren't good people out there who are rabbinic leaders. There are great people, but look for those attributes: selflessness, not caring about themselves, speaking in an uplifting manner. When they give rebuke, it's in a very, very measured way where they're watching every word. And once you develop a relationship, then you start, that's when you should, be more comfortable listening and taking advice.
So one thing
I would say, I'm sorry, Allison. I would second that. I would third that. I would vote for that. You have to have a rabbi. Everybody needs some spiritual guidance, but you have to have someone who is grounded, understands you, and is not trying to manipulate you, but trying to get you to grow.
Right.
So I just yesterday brought something to mind about someone I was speaking with yesterday, who has named this person as their rabbi, their rav, the one they go to for everything, and it's someone I have a question about. So I said to this individual, if all you're hearing from this rabbi is musar, if that's all you're hearing, then there's something wrong in the relationship, because there's more to life than just giving you musar. He's got to give you encouragement. He's got to give you strength. He's got to give you a sense of self so that you can make some good, independent decisions.
You want a Torah source, Allison? Can I quickly jump in? A Torah source. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, another person, I wasn't that close to him, but another person, of blessed memory, who lived his life exactly like that. He says that if you look in the Torah, it says that Yaakov, patriarch Jacob, when he left his father's home and he came to a well and there was some shepherds there and he had a conversation with them. So he says, Achai me'ayin atem. That's how he opened the conversation. My brothers, where are you from? So Rabbi Yaakov asks the brothers, like, how did that, he didn't even know them. And today in the vernacular, you hear the word brother like that. But so Yaakov was offended by their lack of diligence to their work. It was the middle of the day and the shepherds used to be out all day. And they were hanging out at the well in the middle of the day. That they were stealing from their employer. They weren't giving him a full day's work. So he wanted to rebuke them. So first I have to develop a relationship with them. I have to offer a kind word. Hello, my brothers, where are you from? Engage in a conversation. And then he gently tells them, now is not the time for gathering the sheep. So that's what Yaakov, it was very impactful to me as a child hearing that from Rabbi Kamenetsky.
So I guess something that I came to realize recently that I repeated to many of our Makom members was that I don't think a healthy leader needs an outcome from his or her flock or, the people that come to them. The leader is there to serve. The leader is there to inspire. The leader is there to, be a resource. But I think, would you agree that the leader is not supposed to need a certain thing from the people coming to the leader, because it's no longer of service if they need a certain outcome or a certain, obviously you get nachas from people that you've been able to inspire, and it feels good to know that you're helping people grow in a healthy and, Jewish way. But to need a certain outcome seems to me like a red flag. And there seems to be certain leaders that do want to control the followers and see a certain outcome.
Can I do the rabbi one? Can I go first, Doctor?
Sure.
So first of all, you see that God himself doesn't force outcomes on us. What more proof do you need that God gave us bechira? Hashem gave us free choice. God had the power to taser us if we do something wrong. Quite to the contrary, my understanding of this is that God gave us free choice so that we can learn from our mistakes. That's what's the biggest life lessons we have, is learning from a mistake. So there's so many facets about this we were discussing, that phenomena that's wrong, because in that type of authoritarian leader, the followers are not comfortable discussing their sins with the leader. When they should be most comfortable, that's when you need a leader to help you. You need a parent. I do the same thing with parents. It's very similar with parents. The authoritarian parents have no idea what's going on with the children once they hit 10, 12, 14 years old, because they don't talk to them. So that's one thing. It's you see from God, that God didn't do this, and it's just wrong. Just quick anecdote. A year or two ago, I went to one of the leading rabbis in the world today to discuss a very complex issue. And he told me his opinion on it. It wasn't strict law. It wasn't halacha. It was more advice. And I believe in being honest. I respectfully said, Rabbi, I have a hard time accepting this. So his immediate response was, I didn't tell you to listen. You came to me. Exactly. Listen to the humility. And again, it was a cultural thing. It wasn't a Shabbos. And this rabbi happened to have called me once. I did something in public that he thought was, that I should have done differently. He picked up a phone and he called me, said, Rabbi Yaakov, with the greatest respectfully, I think you should reconsider. And then he hung up. That's it. He said, if you want to have a question, you can talk to me about it some more, but I just think you should reconsider. And of course, I took his advice. But his humility was, like, the man told me something. I said, I haven't lived my life like that. That's not the advice I'm giving parents. And I can't see myself giving this advice to parents. He says, he laughed. He said, who told you? You don't have to come to me. I didn't tell you to listen to me. I told you, like he said, I serve the food. You don't want to eat it. It's your business. That's a rabbi. That's a leader that you could follow to the end of the world.
And I totally agree with that. And thank God I've had some Rabbeim in my life like that, and I still do. But if you look at the child rearing literature, what's the best way to teach a child? It's not to constantly hover over them. They never learn that way. They just never learn that way. You've got to give them a little bit of freedom so that they can learn from their mistakes. Obviously, you don't want them running out into traffic or running with scissors or all those other things that children can do and get into serious trouble with. But if they don't have some freedom, you're going to have a child who's going to be very rebellious, and you'll have bigger problems later on, and they will never learn important life lessons along the way.
Totally.
So if you have a rabbi who's telling you exactly what you should be doing, isn't embarrassing you, if you're not doing it the way he demands of you, then you're not living a healthy life.
Can I add something else and can I give some advice to parents, if I may, and loved ones? Because you didn't bring this up, and I think it would be an important point to consider. If you have a loved one who's in a relationship like that with a leader, how do you extract them from it? And I think that's one of the most, I would love to hear Dr. Salamon, I would love to hear literature, if there is any, on this. How do you get people to step back a little bit? And my humble advice, again, this is Yanky, not any, I'm always careful if this is something that's science-based, I say it, and if it's not, it's just Yanky. But this is my anecdotal experience of, guiding parents for almost 40 years now. In very small doses, in other words, whatever advice you're giving them, to step back a little bit. Don't come and say this person's a cult leader. You're just going to drive them away from you and towards them, towards him or her. I think the worst thing you could do is just do a frontal approach, to just say this is a horrible person. Gently try to just bring in, do you find that, ask small questions a little bit at a time, and try to get them to think, to step back. Usually try to find a time when they're away from that person for a week or two. I mean it, I'm dead serious. And then when you get them away, say, listen, I've been thinking about this. I'll tell you, a father asked me to speak to his daughter. Just for the record, I only speak to young ladies once and with a parent there. But he was terrified that his daughter was in a cult situation or exactly an authoritarian or abusive person. And this young lady was describing her relationship. She was 19 years old. This guy was 35. And she was telling how she texts him and she does, and he's good and he's great and he's always there for her. I mean, talk about red flags, like they were all dinging. And I was thinking, like, how should I respond? And I said, well, what hours of the day does he text you? What hours do you have this exchange? And she says, oh, he's incredible. Anytime. Like, even if I text him 2, 3 in the morning, he'll usually respond within 10 minutes. And I was thinking to myself, what should I say now that would say how weird this is? If I would say this is sick, so I was quiet. I held myself, I was like, punching, not to say anything right away. So I said, imagine a few years from now. That's what I told the young lady. I said, imagine a few years from now, if you're married and you have a child or two, and you go downstairs to make a bottle for the baby, and you see your husband on the couch texting a 19-year-old girl, how would you feel? And her face dropped. Like, that was the only thing I said. I said a lot of different things. It wasn't direct. I put her in the situation. I gave an example. I don't think it changed overnight, but she was out of there within a couple of months after that. I think that was the most effective thing that I said. I'm saying so. And I've tried a lot of things that didn't work. So I think that would be, try to be creative and try to get them to reflect, and don't do the frontal approach. It just doesn't work.
And the science is the same. So you got it, Rabbi. You must have been reading the journals. Basically, you join with the person that you're trying to teach and evacuate from the cult slowly, step by step by step. You do not become confrontational, because if you do, you lose them. They keep with their cult leader.
Thank you. I'm honored. I go for it.
I want to sort of do 2 last questions before we wrap this fascinating conversation up. And I hope that this interview will be watched far and wide and shared far and wide, because I think this is so important. I want to dig a little further into the topic of manipulation, and I want to end off with prevention, because we got to end on a good note. In terms of manipulation, Dr. Salamon, I'll address this to you, and then I'm going to do a second manipulation question to Rabbi Horowitz. We all manipulate at some point in our life to a certain degree. And I've heard people that are defenders of what I see are sort of manipulators, as opposed to a person who has done something manipulative at some point in his life. So how do we sort of, understand the difference between a healthy person occasionally doing something manipulative? Probably many people here have done something manipulative to some degree at some point in their life, as opposed to the serial manipulator. Where's the...
Okay, so just based on what the rabbi said, Rabbi Yaakov, you get a good example. By saying what he said to this 19-year-old, that was a kind of manipulation, but that was a healthy manipulation. Try to think of yourself a certain way. That is not gaslighting. It's totally different. That's a healthy manipulation. Gaslighting, which is unhealthy manipulation, is when you do something to an individual and you say, no, that's not what occurred. You're misinterpreting, or you did that to me, or something along those lines. That's the distinction. It's a very clear, it's not a fine line. It's a very clear distinction between being a healthy kind of encouraging, take a look at yourself kind of manipulation, versus I am now going to tell you something that is totally not real, and you're going to be forced to believe it and act according to what I want you to do.
Okay.
I think that part where you ask the person, how would you feel about it? I think that would be the key. If you'd ask me to describe the difference between healthy and unhealthy, in the situation where I spoke to the young lady, I didn't tell her what's right or wrong. I pretended to say, I said, how would you feel in that situation? So again, you're empowering her, even when you're trying to clear. I mean, the clear message was that I thought it was unhealthy, but even then, Rabbi Dr. Chaim Foyman, I forgot to mention, he was the master mentor, and at this, I learned a lot of this from him. So please, Allison, sorry.
And so for the manipulation question for you, I've heard people justify manipulation for the good of spreading Torah, so that we have an obligation to increase, Torah observance amongst our fellow Jews. And so if in the act of helping someone to become more religious, more frum, you have to do it through manipulative tactics, so be it. That's sort of part of, what Judaism says. So when I heard someone comment this, that seemed just super wrong to me. And, sort of why does the person have to get there in a healthy way as opposed to through an unhealthy means?
There's a difference between.
Oh, sorry.
There's a difference between offering it and shaming someone into it.
Mm-hmm.
A big difference. Rabbi, please take over.
Yeah. So somebody asked me why, a similar question, Allison and Doctor, like, to describe what's wrong with these people who are protesting what they consider to be immodest behavior, or people who, but they're doing a good thing. So I say the people who are sitting there yelling at women that aren't dressed sneezing, it's not more of a good thing. It's a horrible thing. It's an anti-Torah. These are dirty people who have dirty minds and are projecting. This is not healthy. This is not normal. This is not the way. The Torah didn't tell us to do this. In fact, there are laws in the Torah for how to give rebuke, and none of that resembles this. So I propose that when people act in that way, they're degrading the Torah. Short term, you might be getting people to do different things, but ultimately, the resentment that people feel to being manipulated like this is the biggest turnoff to religion possible, including other people who watch this. So this isn't the way. But I told someone, it was late at night, and I said, so tell me, what's wrong with this? What's wrong with people who are constantly rebuking and So I said, what the problem is? These folks don't know where God ends and they start. They think they're God. That's in a nutshell. Theologically, that's what I think it is. They think they're God, and they think that God sits in judgment. We don't sit in judgment. So we're supposed to support people and help them and try to get them to be inspired to learn Torah. Sure, if I tell people that it's Erev Yom Kippur, and if you don't stand in shul and you're going to get smitten or whatever. I might get some short term. There's no juice there, though. It doesn't stay. There's no stickiness. And it's sticky. Sometimes they can manipulate people for 30 years. But in my mind, I don't think that's what God wants at all. Like I said, God doesn't do this with us. God doesn't do this with us. God.
All right. Final thoughts. There are some of these leaders at large still in our community. So for both of you, I'd like to ask you, in terms of distraction, sort of taking the oxygen out of their leadership, and then also prevention, how do we try to create systems to prevent people like this from getting traction in the future? I know this is a huge topic, but any final thoughts, Dr. Salamon, and then Rabbi Horowitz?
I don't know that there's a good answer for that. There are plenty of articles written educating children to be more independent. Parents should be more aware of what their children are getting involved in, things like that. But people are people, and unfortunately, there will always be individuals out there who are looking for someone to give them guidance. Like I said before, the authoritarian dynamic. They want someone to tell them what to do. And if they can't think for themselves, or they don't not sure that they can make good decisions, they will always become vulnerable. Question is, how do you get to these people soon enough so that they don't get sucked in? The answer is, we don't really know for sure. And all of these recommendations are good ones. Yes, teach your children to be more independent. You be more aware of what they're involved in. channel them into programs that are supportive for their learning, not manipulative. All of those things are good, appropriate. Um, there are red flags all along the way, and we should be more aware of them. But there is no one good protocol that we can all follow. Not from what I've seen, not from what the literature shows me.
Actually, can you just, before we switch to Rabbi Horowitz, can you just sort of explain to our listeners what is the harm of being emotionally abused or manipulated by someone? There's no weight on you, and what harm can be done still?
Essentially, it's any kind of abuse can cause the same basic type of harm. It can actually change structures within the brain. Any kind of abuse can do that, which makes you over time more dependent on people who are going to harm you. It can make you physically ill. It can make you emotionally difficult, having difficulty in relationships, unable to carry out certain tasks. We see people who've been emotionally abused. They can't hold on to jobs. They're always arguing with people. A wide range of possible outcomes from emotional to physical, all the way through. In fact, there was a recent article in one of the medical journals that there's a correlation between any kind of abuse and developing asthma, of all things.
Wow.
So it could be anything. Now, correlation is not necessarily causation, but it's a pretty strong correlation there, at least what's reported in that sample.
Rabbi Horowitz.
You know, I'm thinking of my experience with child sexual abuse and becoming aware of it. You know, I started dealing with teens at risk in 1996. And about 2002-03, it started hitting me that a large percentage of the children that were, you know, in very bad shape had been abused. I call it abandoning life, not abandoning religion. You know, the two groups of people, but when I started realizing how bad it was and that it was, I started speaking about it. And it took years. I'm not saying I was the only one speaking about it. Those of us in the field, the 10, 12 of 15 of us who were talking about this regularly over the next year, it takes time. And I think this is a great start. I haven't heard much of this discussed in the public realm. And I think what you're doing, Allison, is a great service. And I think everyone who's listening to this, if it resonates with you, pass it on to your friends, talk about it. So, and I think, look, we see, we made extraordinary progress, even in the last few years, even the last, years of I think Walter did it for so many years. It's not coincidental that he was caught recently. And so many of these other ones, most of the high profile cases you hear are 10, 20, 30 years old. And I think we're making great progress. So I think we need to talk about this. We need to have honest discussions about the theology. What is the role of a leader in terms of engaging with his or her people in his care? And the more, do a Google search for emotionally manipulative people, print it in a little card, and hand it to someone. Rabbi Feynman was a master at this. When he wanted to not change my mind, and he wanted me to see things differently, he'd slide a piece of paper over to me, tell me, read it. He would be quiet. I don't know how he did it. He had such patience. He would wait for me to read it. And he said, "So, Yaakov, what do you think?" And so try that. Just have a card with you. When you see someone's and taking advice from someone, just let somebody else do the talking. Let Wikipedia do the talking. And I think we just need to talk about things. We're not immune from the world's problems. We never were. And I think dialogue is important, and bringing, especially in advance. I spoke to our teenage children about this, about following people and whom attributes, not names. When you start with a name, it's problematic. Talk about the attributes. What are the attributes of someone you should follow? And I think it's a very healthy, I did it with my students. We should talk about it. It's the beginning of a conversation. I to the best of my knowledge, I haven't heard this discussed much. One final thought. I have the privilege of being involved in YU's smicha training They do fantastic 3-4 year training for the smicha, the studying to be rabbis. And one of the things that I speak for them usually once a year. One of the things that I spoke about is for them to be in touch with the power they have over people. And most people who go into public life might not be aware of this, the incredible power that you have, and how someone who comes to you is vulnerable. They come to you at the worst points in their life, and you could start feeling omnipotent, that you're this wonderful person, and and it's a short hop, skip, and a jump to getting into trouble if we're not mindful about it. And I think it's something that we should be talking to our teachers, to our leaders, to our rabbis and rebbitzins. It should be part of their training to understand. Nobody cannot look. People come to all three of us for different types of things. We know that vulnerability, and it's so easy to get sucked into this.
Dr. Salamon, is there anything you want to add?
Look, there are people who are natural abusers. They start that way. They go into certain fields where they know that they can target a community and individuals within that community. But there are also people who are lacking in ego strength. And because they have managed to get into a certain career path or profession, that they know that they can target a community, that strengthens that desire on their part to be more in control of others.
Okay.
Either way, we need to be wary of them. We need to look for the red flags, and we need to warn others in a positive, constructive kind of way to just be wary.
Totally agree. Just a final thought that I have on this, that I wonder if it's a model that we could adopt here. I talked about something in Israel called the Tikun Forum, where it's lawyers, therapists, and rabbis that get tips about abusers that are not criminals. If they're criminals, they should go to the police. But I would say, I think it's emotional abusers, and they assess, loss of testimony, and if someone is dangerous, they warn people about them. And that's something that I wonder, could we build something like that in the US? Because this is nothing that you can go to the police for. It's not a crime, and yet the damage can, last for a lifetime. So as, I think about what type of systemic fixes we could create to prevent these things, that's coming to mind here. I want to thank you both for your time and expertise. This has been a fascinating conversation. And I hope you both continue, have many long years of teaching, inspiring, and preventing abuse in our community.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Allison.
Thanks so much. Thanks for listening. You can catch us same time, same place next week. Bye-bye.